2. Hera. Hera, wife of Zeus and queen of the gods, was the protector of marriage and women. Mortal wives prayed to her for harmony in their households, for healthy children and faithful husbands. She presided over weddings and blessed unions that honored the sacred bonds she represented. In Greek society, she was deeply respected, with her temples numerous and worship widespread. But Hera was also one of the most vengeful gods on Mount Olympus, and this made her a catastrophically poor match for her husband. She was beautiful, powerful, and proud, but she had no desire to marry her brother. Their mother, Rhea, had made clear her disapproval of such a union, and Hera respected her mother's wishes. More than that, Hera valued her independence, having no interest in becoming subordinate to Zeus or enduring his constant infidelities. Perhaps it was her very indifference that drew him, the fact that she did not fawn over him as others did, that caused Zeus to desire her above all others. He pursued her relentlessly, his advances being rejected day after day, until, finally, Zeus resorted to deception. He knew Hera walked often in the foothills below Olympus, enjoying the mortal world's beauty. He waited until she was alone, far from witnesses, and transformed himself into a small bird, bedraggled and shivering as if caught in a storm. The bird fell from the sky and landed in Hera's lap. She looked down at the pitiful creature, its tiny body trembling, and felt her heart soften. She gathered the bird gently in her hands and wrapped it in her cloak to keep it warm. The moment the cloak enclosed them both, Zeus transformed back to his true form. Hera found herself suddenly in her brother's embrace, his arms around her, his face close to hers. She had been tricked, and now she faced a choice: cry out and bring shame upon herself when others discovered them in this compromising position, or accept what had happened and make the best of it. Hera, always conscious of propriety and reputation, chose the latter. If she was going to be bound to Zeus, she would do so as his wife, not as another of his casual conquests. They married shortly after, and Hera took her place on the throne beside him as Queen of Olympus. It was not a love match, despite Zeus's initial passion. It was a partnership forged from necessity and pride. Hera would rule at Zeus's side, managing Olympus and protecting women and families, but she would never forget how their marriage began. She would never fully trust her husband. The jealousy that would define her character and drive so many myths forward had its roots in that moment of deception, in the knowledge that Zeus had wanted her badly enough to trick her into marriage, but not enough to remain faithful once he had won. Io. One of Zeus's most insulting acts of infidelity, at least from Hera's perspective, involved Io, a princess of Argos who served as one of Hera's own priestesses. The girl was loyal, devoted to her service, and entirely innocent. None of this mattered to Zeus when desire struck him, with him beginning a series of nighttime visits to Hera's temple, foolishly believing she would not notice. He was wrong. The queen of the gods descended from Olympus to investigate, and Zeus, seeing her approach, began to panic. He transformed Io into a beautiful white cow, hoping this crude disguise would fool his wife. When she arrived, she found him standing there beside the cow, chewing on a reed and attempting to look casual, as if he often spent time in meadows, admiring cattle. Hera was not fooled for a moment, but she was clever enough not to confront Zeus directly without proof. Instead, she smiled and complimented him on the magnificent white cow. "Dear husband," she said sweetly, "what a beautiful cow you have there." "Oh, this cow," Zeus patted the beast nervously, This cow is nothing special, nothing special at all. It is definitely no cow of mine." "Is that so?" Hera's smile widened. "Then you would have no problem if I took it, would you?" Zeus felt his stomach drop. He was trapped, for to refuse would only confirm Hera's suspicions. He had no choice but to present his wife with Io, still trapped in bovine form, and watch as Hera led her away. Hera knew her husband would attempt to rescue his lover, but had no intention of making it easy for either of them. She placed Io under the guard of Argus Panoptes, a giant with 100 eyes scattered across his body. The perfect guardian, Argus never fully slept, for even when resting, half his eyes remained open. He tied Io to an olive tree by day and locked her in a stable by night, never allowing her a moment's freedom, constantly watching to ensure Zeus could not approach. Zeus watched from Olympus, overwhelmed by guilt and helplessness. To intervene directly would be to invite Hera's wrath, but he could not simply abandon Io to eternal imprisonment. Finally, he summoned Hermes, the messenger god, and commanded him to free the unfortunate princess. Hermes was clever, and he understood that Argus could not be defeated through force, his 100 eyes allowing him to see and react to any strike before it landed. So instead, Hermes disguised himself as a simple shepherd and approached Argus as a friend, sitting down beside him to share stories and pass the time. He carried his pipes, and as the day wore on, he began to play. The music was soft and sweet, gentle as a lullaby, and gradually Argus began to relax. One by one, his eyes began to close. First a dozen, then 24, then 50, then 90. Hermes continued playing, his music never wavering, watching carefully as the last few eyes drooped shut. When the 100th eye finally closed, Hermes acted instantly. He drew his sword and struck off Argus's head in a single blow. The giant died without waking, and Io was free. Hera discovered the murder almost immediately. She mourned Argus's loyalty, and to honor his service, she took his 100 eyes and set them in the tail of a peacock, her favorite bird. To this day, peacocks display those distinctive eye spots on their magnificent tails, each one a remnant of Hera's loyal servant. But Io's freedom did not end her torment. Hera, enraged by Hermes' interference, sent a gadfly to pursue the girl. The insect was small but relentless. It followed Io everywhere, stinging her constantly, driving her to run endlessly, never stopping, never finding rest. Still trapped in bovine form, Io fled across the known world, her desperate flight giving names to the places she passed. She ran along the coast of a sea that would later be named the Ionian Sea in her memory. She crossed a strait between Europe and Asia that would forever after be called the Bosphorus, meaning ford of the cow. She wandered for years, suffering constantly, until finally she reached Egypt, so far from Greece that even Hera's power could not easily reach her. Zeus descended at last and restored Io to her human form. He could not undo the years of suffering, but he could at least end the punishment. Io bore Zeus a son, Epiphus, who would become king of Egypt. Through him she became the ancestor of many of Greece's greatest heroes, including Perseus and Heracles. The priestess, who had been transformed into a cow, became the founding mother of heroism itself, though the price she paid for that honor was terrible, beyond measure. Leto. Leto, Zeus's 6th wife, had been a Titaness, and she had given Zeus twin children who had become two of the most powerful Olympians. But being the mother of gods did not protect her from Hera's jealous rage. When the queen of the gods discovered that Leto had spent a night with Zeus and now carried his children in her womb, her fury was absolute. She sent the great serpent Python, a monstrous creature that had terrorized the earth since ancient times, to hunt Leto down and prevent her from giving birth. The serpent pursued her relentlessly, driving her from place to place and never allowing even a moment of rest. Leto fled across the entirety of Greece in her desperation, her pregnancy growing more difficult with each passing day, searching frantically for somewhere safe to deliver her children. But Hera's reach was long. She decreed that no land could offer Leto shelter. No city could take her in. Any place that dared to provide refuge for Zeus's pregnant lover would face the queen of the gods' wrath, a risk none were willing to take. Leto travelled from Athens to Crete, from Lemnos to Samos, begging for sanctuary, but every door closed before her. Finally, on the brink of despair, she came to Delos, a barren, rocky island adrift in the Aegean Sea. Delos was so poor and insignificant that it barely registered in Hera's attention, but even this tiny island hesitated to defy the queen of the gods. But Leto had nowhere else to go, and so she made the island's people a promise. If Delos would shelter her and allow her to give birth, her son Apollo would honor the island forever. He would make Delos his sacred place, build temples there and bring pilgrims from across the Greek world. The barren rock would become a center of worship known throughout Greece. Delos, with little to lose and everything to gain, agreed. Leto finally had her sanctuary. But Hera was not finished with her persecution. Even as Leto's labor began, Hera enacted her cruelest plot yet. She trapped Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, and her own daughter on Mount Olympus, preventing any births from taking place throughout the world. And so Leto's labor continued, agonizing and endless, but still the children would not come. For 9 days and 9 nights, Leto suffered on Delos. The pain was unrelenting, her body racked with contractions that led nowhere, the twins trapped within her, unable to enter the world. She cried out for help, but there was no help to give. Hera had ensured that this torture would continue until Leto died or went mad, whichever came first. Finally, the other goddesses could no longer bear to witness such suffering. They gathered together and offered Hera a bribe, a necklace of gold and amber, beautiful enough to tempt even the queen of the gods. In exchange, they begged her to release Eileithyia. Hera, satisfied that she had made her point, finally relented. Eileithyia descended from Olympus and arrived on Delos. The moment she stepped onto the island, Leto's labor resumed properly. First came Artemis, a daughter, emerging into the world as dawn broke over the Aegean. Then, with the newborn child's help, for even as an infant Artemis possessed the power to assist in childbirth, Apollo was born as the sun reached its zenith. The twins had arrived, and they would grow to become two of the most powerful and complex gods on Olympus. Apollo would embody light, music, prophecy, and healing. Artemis would rule over the hunt, the moon, wild places, and virginity. Both would be deadly archers, and both would remember forever how their mother had suffered because of Hera's jealousy. Hephaestus. Hephaestus, god of smithing and fire, had the most painful beginning of any Olympian. He was born from Hera alone, conceived by her as revenge for Zeus birthing Athena from his own head. But where Athena had emerged perfect and fully formed, Hephaestus came into the world twisted and lame, his legs malformed. Hera took one look at her son and saw only failure. She wanted to prove she could create life as Zeus had, but instead she had produced a crippled child, an embarrassment before the other gods. In her shame, she seized the infant and hurled him from the heights of Olympus before any of the other gods could see, casting him down toward the sea far below. But Hephaestus survived the fall. He plunged into the ocean and sank deep beneath the surface, where he was found by the sea nymphs Thetis and Eurynomy. They took pity on the broken, crying infant and brought him to an underwater grotto, a hidden cave lit by volcanic vents, where the water was warm and the stone glowed red with heat. There, in that secret sanctuary beneath the waves, Hephaestus grew up. The nymphs cared for him, and as he matured, he discovered that he had a gift that transcended his physical limitations. He could work metal like no one else. He understood fire and forge in ways that seemed almost instinctive. He began crafting jewelry for his foster mothers, with his skill growing with each passing year, until he became a master craftsman, the greatest the world had ever known. But he never forgot what his real mother had done. The memory of Hera's rejection was a burden he always carried, and when he had finally perfected his art, Hephaestus decided it was time to return to Olympus and claim what should have been his from birth. He crafted a gift for Hera to mark his return, a magnificent golden throne, the craftsmanship more beautiful than anything already on Olympus. He sent it to her ahead of his arrival, and Hera, delighted by such an exquisite gift, and perhaps feeling a twinge of guilt about the son she had cast away, sat upon it immediately. The moment she settled onto the throne, invisible chains sprang from the arms and locked around her wrists. Shackles wrapped around her ankles. She was trapped, held prisoner by her own son's masterwork. The gods tried everything to free her. They pulled at the chains and struck them with weapons, but nothing worked. Only the throne's creator could release her. Zeus, desperate to free his wife, finally decided to send messengers to Hephaestus. The rejected son had conditions. He wanted his own place on Olympus, recognition as one of the gods, and above all, he wanted a bride. Not just any bride, but Aphrodite, the most beautiful goddess in existence. Zeus agreed without question. Hera was freed from the throne, and Aphrodite found herself married to a husband she had never chosen, bound to a god she felt nothing for. It was perhaps the cruelest irony on Olympus, the goddess of love trapped in a loveless marriage, given away like property to secure another's freedom. Hephaestus took his place among the 12 Olympians and established his workshop beneath Mount Etna in Sicily. There, in a vast forge chamber heated by the volcano's fire, he created wonders that would shape the fate of gods and heroes alike. He crafted Athena's aegis, Hermes' winged helmet and sandals, and the golden chariot that Helios drove across the sky each day. The Romans would know him as Vulcan, god of fire and forge. They said his workshop lay beneath Mount Etna, and when the volcano erupted with smoke and molten rock, it was simply Vulcan at work. The mountain's fury, nothing more than the byproduct of his divine forge. The origin and birth of Heracles. As Zeus, the king of the gods, sat on his golden throne atop Mount Olympus, he looked down through the clouds at the troubled land of Greece. The view from the sacred mountains stretched across the entire peninsula, from the rocky shores of the Aegean to the dark forests of Arcadia. What he saw troubled him deeply. Cities burned in the distance, their smoke rising in dark columns into the sky. It was an age of chaos, ravaged by endless wars between rival kingdoms. Bronze weapons clashed in 100 different valleys as armies fought for scraps of territory. Meanwhile, ferocious beasts prowled the land. From deep caves emerged monsters born from the blood of ancient titans. Monstrous lions terrorized travelers on the roads, serpentine creatures poisoned entire rivers with their venom, and giants still walked the earth, feasting on any mortal unlucky enough to cross their path. Zeus knew what had to be done. Greece needed a hero, but not just any hero. It needed someone with divine blood flowing through their veins, someone strong enough to face the monsters that ordinary men could not defeat. He would father this champion himself, a mortal son who could walk among humans but possess the strength of the gods. This hero would unite the fractured people and rid the world of these terrible monsters once and for all. This hero was to be Heracles, though the Romans would later know him as Hercules. Zeus searched the mortal world carefully for the perfect mother, his divine eyes scanning the cities and villages of Greece. His gaze finally settled upon the beautiful Alcmena of Thebes, a wife of the general Amphitryon. She was not chosen at random. Alcmena was a descendant of the famous hero Perseus, the slayer of Medusa, and her bloodline already carried the seeds of greatness. Her beauty was renowned throughout Boeotia, but more importantly, she possessed virtue and strength of character that would shape a hero's heart. While her husband Amphitryon was away at war, fighting in a campaign against the Teleboans, Zeus descended from Olympus. The king of the gods took the form of Amphitryon himself, appearing at Alcmena's door one night, covered in the dust of travel, carrying his shield and spear, speaking with her husband's voice. Alcmena welcomed him with joy, believing her husband had returned victorious from battle. Zeus lay with her that night, and to ensure his son's conception, he held back the dawn itself, stretching one night into the length of 3. In those extended hours, he planted the seed of the greatest hero Greece would ever know. When the real Amphitryon returned from battle the following day, Alcmena expressed confusion at his arrival, for she believed her husband had already come home. But the deed was done. Zeus had accomplished his plan, intending to make this child the next great king of Greece, ruler of the mighty city of Tiryns. Little did Zeus know that his wife, Hera, queen of the gods, had been watching these events unfold from her own throne on Olympus. Every moment she had observed, her jaw clenched in fury. In the past, she had endured Zeus's countless infidelities in bitter silence. She had watched him father illegitimate children with mortal women, nymphs, and even titanesses. Each betrayal had cut deep, but she had contained her rage, maintaining the dignity expected of the Queen of Olympus. But this time was different. This time she had finally had enough. The careful planning, the extended night, the intention to make this illegitimate child a king was more than she could bear. When Zeus, in his pride and foolishness, swore a sacred oath before all the gods, declaring that the next descendant of Perseus to be born would rule over Tiryns and become the greatest king in Greece, Hera saw her opportunity. As Alcmena's pregnancy neared its end, when the moment of Heracles' birth approached, Hera put her plan into action. She summoned Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, and commanded her to sit outside Alcmena's chamber with her legs crossed and her fingers interlocked, a magical gesture that would delay the birth. For 7 agonizing days and nights, Alcmena labored in terrible pain, unable to deliver her child while the goddess maintained her spell. Meanwhile, in the royal palace of Tiryns, Hera used her magic to speed up a different pregnancy. The queen there was also carrying a descendant of Perseus, a child who would be called Eurystheus. Through Hera's intervention, this infant was born prematurely but healthy, entering the world just hours before Heracles finally emerged. When Zeus discovered the deception, it was already too late. The moment the news reached Olympus, thunder rolled across Greece, and lightning split the sky. Eurystheus, weak and cowardly though he would prove to be, had been born first. He was now the next descendant of Perseus to enter the world, and Zeus was bound by his own sacred oath to give him the kingship. The foundations of Olympus trembled with the god's fury, marble columns cracking, divine halls shaking, but, for all his rage, even the king of the gods could not break an oath he had sworn before all the immortals. While Zeus could do nothing about his son's lost kingdom, he devised his own revenge on Hera. One night, shortly after Heracles was born, Zeus entered Hera's bedchamber on Olympus. The vast chamber was silent, except for Hera's deep, regular breathing. In his arms, Zeus carried the infant Heracles, wrapped in a simple blanket, and placed him on Hera's breast. The hungry infant immediately began to nurse, but this was no ordinary feeding. With each swallow, Heracles absorbed some of Hera's immortal power, her divine essence flowing into his tiny body and strengthening his muscles and bones far beyond those of ordinary men. Suddenly, Hera woke, feeling the strange sensation at her breast. Looking down in the dim light, she saw what was happening and shrieked in rage and disgust. With a violent motion, she threw the baby off her chest, sending him tumbling through the air. Her divine milk sprayed across the heavens in a great arc, the droplets spreading and glowing with ethereal light. This milk would settle out in the vastness of space, crystallizing into countless stars, becoming known to mortals as the Milky Way, a permanent reminder of her humiliation written across the night sky. Zeus caught the infant before he could fall, chuckling to himself at his clever revenge. He brought Heracles back to earth, placing him gently in a wooden cradle next to his mother Alcmena. The baby settled quietly, his body now filled with the stolen divine power. Back on Olympus, Hera paced her chambers in fury, her robes swirling around her. This was too great an embarrassment for the queen of the gods to ignore. The theft of her divine essence, the mark now written across the heavens, demanded retribution. That very night, she summoned 2 venomous serpents from the depths of the earth, sending them slithering through the darkness towards Thebes, towards the house where Heracles slept. The serpents crept through a window into the nursery, their scales grating against the stone floor. They reared up over the cradle, ready to strike at the sleeping infant. But when they lunged forward, something extraordinary happened. Baby Heracles opened his eyes and giggled with delight, as if someone had given him new toys to play with. His tiny hands reached out and seized one serpent in each fist. The serpents thrashed and coiled, trying desperately to escape or bite, but the infant's grip was like iron. Heracles laughed louder, a sound of pure joy as he squeezed tighter and tighter. The bones in the serpents' necks cracked and splintered. Their eyes bulged, their tongues protruded, and finally they went limp. When Alcmena and the servants rushed in, drawn by the baby's laughter, they found Heracles holding 2 dead snakes like cloth dolls, still laughing with innocent joy. High on Olympus, Hera looked down at the scene, her face white with rage. The strength he had stolen from her divine milk had saved him. Her own power had been turned against her. As she watched the mortals celebrate the miracle, as they praised the strong child who would surely become a great hero, Hera made a solemn vow. If she could not kill Heracles directly, she would ensure his life was filled with suffering. She would turn his strength against him and ensure that any glory he earned would come through unbearable suffering. This child might live, but Hera would make certain he would never know peace. The Curse of Troy. Long ago, when monsters still roamed the earth and gods walked among mortals, the great walls of Troy had not yet been built. The land where the city would stand was ruled by King Laomedon, a proud and ambitious man who dreamed of creating a kingdom that would rival the greatest cities of Greece. But Laomedon's ambitions far exceeded his means, with him lacking the resources and the manpower to build the magnificent city he envisaged. He dreamed of a great fortress with walls so strong that no army could breach them, a city so powerful it could dominate the Hellespont, the narrow strait where Europe and Asia almost touch. Control of this strait meant control of the richest trade route in the known world. But Laomedon had inherited little more than a hilltop settlement after his father's death. His dream seemed impossible, until fate intervened in the most unexpected way. High on Mount Olympus, trouble was brewing in the halls of the gods. Zeus, the king of the immortals, had grown tyrannical in his rule, his temper unpredictable and his punishments severe. He would strike down mortals with lightning for the smallest offences, transform nymphs into trees on a whim, and demand absolute obedience from gods and mortals alike. His behaviour became so erratic that even his own wife, Hera, the queen of the gods, could no longer remain silent. In the quiet corners of Olympus, away from Zeus's all-seeing eyes, Hera began to plot. She approached Poseidon, god of the seas and earthquakes and brother to Zeus himself. Poseidon had long grown resentful of his younger brother's rule, remembering the days when the three brothers had drawn lots to divide the cosmos between them. He felt his domain of the oceans was no less important than Zeus's control of the sky, yet Zeus treated him as a subordinate rather than an equal. Hera also sought out Apollo, the god of the sun, music, and prophecy. Apollo was younger than the others, but his power was immense. He could see the future and shoot arrows that brought sickness and death, yet his extraordinary beauty and skill in music had also made him one of the most revered gods in all of Greece. He, too, had grievances. Zeus had recently humiliated him in front of the other gods, forbidding him from protecting a city that had worshipped him faithfully for generations, and Apollo's pride still burned from the insult. The three conspirators met in secret, in a cave deep beneath the earth where even Zeus's sight could not penetrate. There they made their plan. While Zeus slept, they would bind him with chains forged by Hephaestus, the god of blacksmiths, chains so strong that even the king of the gods could not break them. Once he was restrained, they would force him to swear oaths limiting his power, creating a council of gods to rule Olympus together rather than submitting to one tyrant's whims. When the night came to put their plan into action, the three conspirators crept into Zeus's chamber as he slept. Hera moved quickly, her hands steady as she began to wrap the first chain around her husband's wrist. Poseidon secured his legs, and Apollo worked to bind his other arm, the chains clinking softly in the darkness. But they had underestimated Zeus's awareness. His eyes snapped open just as the final chain was being fastened. He saw Hera above him, Poseidon and Apollo at his sides, and he understood everything in an instant. His roar of rage shook the foundations of Olympus itself. The chains held him, but only for a moment. Thetis, the sea nymph who would one day bear Achilles, heard her king's cry and rushed to his aid. She summoned Briareus, a 100-handed giant from the depths of the earth who tore through the divine chains with ease. Zeus rose from his bed like a storm given form. Lightning crackled around his body and thunder rolled through the palace halls. The three conspirators fell back, knowing they had failed and that Zeus's vengeance would be terrible. Hera, as his wife, could not be punished too severely, although he hung her from the heavens in golden chains for a single day as a warning. But for Poseidon and Apollo, his brother and his son, he devised a punishment that would humble them completely. He stripped away most of their divine power, reducing them to little more than mortals, and cast them down from Olympus. "You will serve a mortal king as common labourers," Zeus declared. "For 1 full year you will know what it means to toil under the command of a lesser being. Perhaps then you will appreciate the burden of rule." As Zeus looked down upon the earth, searching for someone whose character would make the punishment most fitting, his eyes fell upon King Laomedon of Troy. Here was a man whose ambition and pride mirrored that of the gods themselves, but whose arrogance exceeded even his considerable abilities. And so Poseidon and Apollo found themselves standing before the gate of Laomedon's modest fortress, stripped of their divine radiance, appearing as two extraordinarily tall and powerfully built men. "Who are you?" Laomedon demanded as he emerged from his hall to meet these strangers. "We are builders," Poseidon said, carefully, the words bitter in his mouth. "We seek employment, and we hear you have need of strong workers." Laomedon's eyes narrowed with interest. He had been seeking labourers for months, trying to recruit men from across the region to help with his grand building project, but few were willing to work for the wages he offered. "I am building a great city," Laomedon said, gesturing to the rocky hill that overlooked the waters of the Hellespont. "A city with walls that will stand for 1,000 years, walls that no army can breach. I will make Troy eternal, a kingdom that will be remembered long after I am gone. Can you build such walls?" Poseidon and Apollo exchanged glances. They had built palaces on Olympus, had created mountains and carved rivers. Building walls for a mortal city would be simple work, even in their reduced state. "We can build your walls," Apollo said. "But what will you pay us for this labour?" Laomedon smiled, a thin expression that did not reach his eyes. "Build me walls worthy of the gods themselves, and I will give you 30 immortal horses from my stables, horses bred from the divine mares that Zeus gifted to my father. These animals are worth a king's ransom, and they will be yours when the work is complete." It was a generous offer, and the two former gods agreed. They did not need the horses, of course, but they needed employment to fulfill Zeus's punishment, and this task would at least be worthy of their skills. For an entire year, the two gods laboured without rest, working through both day and night. Each morning the citizens of Troy would wake to find that impossible progress had been made whilst they slept. Poseidon would call to the stones beneath the waves, and massive blocks would rise from the seabed, already cut and shaped to the necessary dimensions. Apollo, meanwhile, would sing as he worked, his beautiful voice guiding each stone into its perfect place, the walls rising higher with every note. Finally, after a full year of labour, the walls were complete. They stood, tall and proud, encircling the hill and the growing city within. Perfectly constructed, they curved at precisely the right angles to deflect siege weapons. Their height made scaling them nearly impossible, and into the stone itself the two gods wove the last remnants of their divine power, enchantments that would ensure the walls could never crumble with age, or crack from frost or heat. On the final day, as Apollo set the last stone in place on the great gate, the two gods approached Laomedon for their payment. The king stood on his new walls, guards flanking him, and laughed. "Payment?" Laomedon chuckled. "You expect payment for this work? Look at what you have built. You should be honoured to have contributed to Troy's greatness. That is reward enough. Now leave my city before I have my guards throw you out." The air itself seemed to grow cold. Poseidon and Apollo stood very still, and for a moment the light around them seemed to shimmer, divine power flowing back into them as their year of servitude came to an end. Poseidon's mortal disguise began to fall away, his body growing to great heights until the very ground trembled beneath his feet. Apollo's transformation was no less dramatic. Light radiated from his skin, bright as the sun itself, his beauty becoming almost painful to behold. "You dare to break an oath with gods?" Poseidon's voice boomed across the city. "You dare to cheat those who built your precious walls?" Laomedon fell to his knees, realizing too late the magnitude of his error. He opened his mouth to apologize, but the gods had no interest in his pleas. "These walls will stand," Apollo declared. They will stand strong for generations, just as you wished. But they will not save you. Troy will know glory, yes, but it will also know ruin. Your bloodline will bring about this city's destruction, and these walls we built will watch as Troy burns." With that, the two gods vanished, returning to Olympus to reclaim their place among the immortals. 3 days later, their revenge began. Apollo sent a plague that swept through Troy, killing hundreds and filling the streets with the cries of the bereaved. Poseidon sent a sea monster from the depths of his domain that coiled around ships attempting to enter or leave Troy's harbour, dragging them beneath the waves along with their screaming crews, making both trade and fishing impossible. Laomedon, desperate for a solution, consulted his priests on how to calm the gods' wrath. The message they gave him was clear. He must sacrifice his beloved daughter Hesione to the sea monster or watch Troy die. With tears streaming down his face, Laomedon chained his own daughter to the rocks by the shore, where she waited to be devoured. But fate sent an unlikely saviour. The young hero Heracles, who was passing by on one of his labours, he heard of the monster and offered to slay it, but only if Laomedon would pay him with those same divine horses that he had promised to Poseidon and Apollo. Laomedon agreed, knowing he had little choice. Heracles slew the sea monster in a battle that shook the coastline for 3 days and 3 nights, diving into the creature's mouth and tearing it apart from the inside. But when he emerged, victorious and covered in the beast's blood, Laomedon once again refused to pay. Heracles left Troy in fury, but he did not forget. Years later, he returned with an army and a fleet of ships. He besieged the city, and, despite the magnificent walls that Poseidon and Apollo had built, he found a weakness in the fortifications. There was a single section that had been constructed by mortal hands when the gods had briefly rested, and it lacked the divine strength of the rest. Through this weak point, Heracles and his warriors breached the defences. The city fell. Heracles slaughtered King Laomedon and most of his sons in vengeance for the broken oath. Only the youngest prince, Podarces, survived, and only because his sister, Hesione, threw herself at Heracles' feet and begged for his life, offering her own golden veil as ransom. Heracles accepted the payment and spared the young prince, but only on the condition that he take the throne and rule Troy more honourably than his treacherous father had. From that day forward, Podarces took a new name, Priam, meaning the ransomed one, a constant reminder that his life had been purchased and that the throne was his not by right of birth, but by an enemy's mercy. And so Priam became king of Troy, inheriting a city with the most magnificent walls in the world, walls built by gods, but cursed by them. He rebuilt what Heracles had destroyed, repopulated the city, and ushered in a new era of prosperity. Under his rule, Troy flourished and grew wealthy from trade, becoming one of the most powerful kingdoms in the region. But no matter how much Priam honoured the gods, no matter how much of a better ruler he was than his father, Apollo and Poseidon had not forgotten Laomedon's betrayal. They were content to watch and wait as Priam's Troy grew rich and powerful, as its people forgot the old curses and believed themselves safe. The gods had time. They could afford to wait for the perfect moment to collect what they were owed. I've been David Rintoul for Deep Dive History. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye.